would like to introduce Jessica Gillingham, who's going to present to you today. And like Christian did say, we're going to leave all questions to the Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, Jessica, come onto the stage, and I'm excited to hear your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for that great intro, and it's really good to be here. And big thank you to Bidroom for putting this on. It's you always do such great events and have, providing such great insight for the industry. And it's really great to be able to talk about short-term rentals as well as hotels. And as Chris mentioned, I'm the founder and managing director. It's actually Abode PR, but everyone gets it wrong. And we work with technologies that are transforming short-term rentals, hotels, and other lodging verticals. And today I'm going to present on a subject that is extremely interesting to me. And it's about how short-term rentals are changing the way, transforming hospitality, real estate, and hotels. So I'm just going to assume everyone can see the screen there. So the question, though, that I'm going to put is how demand is impacting change. And it's really a question that I'm going to be putting through in this presentation. What's happening? What are we seeing happening that's changing the way that we are viewing short-term rentals and then other lodging types? So firstly, as not all of the audience comes from a short-term rental perspective or the industry, if there are hotels, I'm going to do a quick kind of run through about the short-term rental industry and where we're at now. Now, pre-COVID, and things have changed, and I haven't seen the figures for what the market is worth since COVID, because obviously we've seen a huge kind of growth in demand over the last 18 months. But pre-COVID, the global short-term rental market was seen to be worth $170 billion. Now, with that, though, one of the really interesting things is the top 50 property managers in the world control just 5% of the total supply. And 99% of properties are actually managed by micro businesses. So that might be individual hosts or operators that just run, a small number of units. So it's a really challenging marketplace and interesting marketplace with these figures. Now, Vacasa, which is, I think it's the largest property manager in the US, only has 30,000 homes under management. Now, that really says something, in this kind of global industry, to have 30,000 and be kind of considered the biggest is still, says something. Now, Airbnb says it's got 5.6 million listings. And the other thing about the short-term rental industry is that it's asset light. So there are low barriers to entry to getting into it. Now, we also at the moment have realized and expected IPOs of the likes of Airbnb, Vacasa, HomeToGo, and Sonder. And then another interesting kind of fact we have is that Airbnb is saying that 20% of booked nights are for stays of over a month now. And this is all changed because of COVID. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this throughout the presentation. Now, what we've seen over the last 18 months is that change has accelerated and the experience of rentals has accelerated as well. So people who had never tried staying in a short-term rental, who were always hotels, wouldn't dream of staying in a short-term rental, they changed their minds over the last 18 months because of the fact that there was more space. It was easier to stay in. It was perceived to be safer than staying in a hotel, no common rooms, none of that kind of thing. So people that had never stayed in a short-term rental, we've seen more and more of them try them and like them over the last 18 months. So one of the challenges that we have with short-term rentals, kind of the fundamental challenges, is the fragmentation of the marketplace, and then also the hyper-localization. So the ability for property managers to scale beyond, scale infinitely is almost impossible. And it's also a difficult business to operate. You know, there are so many moving parts. Each unit is different. It's not in one place. You know, your units as a property manager, you might have one on one beach and one on the beach, you know, the next beach along. So it's not an easy business to operate. And there's also limited brand recognition in the eyes of the consumer of property managers. You know, really the only brand, I mean, I would say that everybody is aware of and knows is Airbnb, whereas in the hotel market, we all know Marriott, Hilton, you know, Accor, Citizen M, you know, all sorts of different brands have real strength of brand, but in the short-term rental industry, that's not currently so. There's also the challenge of inconsistent standards. When people stay in a rental, they're not always sure that what they're going to get. And I know that Jeremy will talk more about this, I'm sure, in his presentation about how to solve this. And also legislation is an issue and will continue to be an issue unless the short-term rental industry is able to kind of have a more of a united front. You know, there's big challenge. And then one of the major challenge is the thorny issue of supply. There is just not enough rentals to meet the demand. So we also are seeing in the world, and this is something that I'm really passionate about at the moment, is fundamental changes in the way we work. Now, I don't know if anyone saw the recent video by Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook talking about the future of work and the metaverse. And there's, you know, huge amounts of opportunity that is happening. Everything is changing. You know, we are in a bit of a revolution at the moment. And there's also been huge changes in consumer demand. We're, you know, the generations that are kind of around now and coming, the kind of post-millennial generations, are generation rent. Many of those consumers have no even desire to actually buy property, but expect to rent and to move around in those rentals. We have increasingly transient populations. We have demand for changes in lease length. You know, it's the death of the 12-month lease. And that's increased over the last 18 months. We have that growth in flexible and remote working that has accelerated since the beginning of the pandemic, but is just increasing and increasing. You know, many companies are giving up their offices or allowing that hybrid working. We're also seeing more and more shorter working contracts, and the gig economy is being, you know, and freelance work as being, you know, a major impact in the way that we live and work. And also in terms of technology expectations, when people go and stay in a short-term rental, they're expecting either the same or better technology than they have at home. And we all have all sorts of technology that impacts our experience of when we're in our own homes, and we expect the same when we go to a rental. And also personalization expectations. So increasingly, as consumers, we will be expecting the suppliers of the product, the service, the rental, or the hotel to know what we want and need through personalization. But at the end of the day, let's really keep it simple, because what we're really talking about is actually beds. And what we're talking about is where people put their heads at night. Now, we can talk all sorts of things about short-term rentals and hotels, but the common denominator is the bed and a place for us to stay. Now, this is a stat from the big hotel school in Switzerland, and it said that 81% of travelers actually mentioned the quality of the beds and the sleep experience as being the decisive factor when choosing a place to stay. And I want to add in here about hospitality as well. So we can look at all sorts of kind of different things in the short-term rental industry, but if we haven't got hospitality right, then we have a problem. Now, people go and stay in various places for several reasons. They want to experience something new. They want to meet new people. They want to, you know, have time away from home, have a break, you know, all those things about hospitality and what that means, those experiences that we want to have when we're not staying in our own home. Now, just in terms of money, there are some really interesting commercial facts around real estate at the moment and about residential real estate. And one of the things to think about is the actual investment that is now going into what's called the alternative residential markets. Now, those alternative residential markets, which I'll go on to in a little more detail shortly, the investment in those has gone up by 63% in Q1 of this year compared to last year. And also multifamily, which in the UK we call build to rent, has become the largest sector for global real estate investment, and it counted for 28% of all transactions in the first half of this year. And as I think we probably all know, but real estate is more valuable than global equities and debt securities combined. Now, a lot of this money is going into what's called alternative residential markets. Now, the alternative residential markets, they don't mean staying in places like this. But I've just put this as an example. The alternative residential markets includes the short-term rental industry, but it also includes co-living and micro-living. Many of those are on short leases. It also includes the later living market and the built-to-rent multifamily market. So lots of investors are looking at different places to put their money and put their investment. Now, what I see as the future is that convergence. And 2 years ago, we used to talk in the short-term rental industry about the convergence between hotels and short-term rentals. Now, I see that as being much wider, the convergence being much wider. And because with all the demand for short-term rentals, we do need to look at where the supply might come from. And supply will come from second homes. We can get better at helping owners, persuading owners to rent their homes. And you know, there's a vast majority of supply that is actually out there of second homes that have never been rented on, you know, Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking, you know, any of the sites. And those we need as an industry to get better at persuading those owners to put them onto market, you know, for parts of the year or you know, for all of the year. The other thing that supply might come from is distressed hotel assets converting to short-term rentals. So basically having a hotel room or a motel room and putting a kitchen in. Like, we are increasingly seeing that happen with hotels that are really struggling. And really for those hotels, it's looking at the return on investment. You know, is it worth the X amount of dollars to put the kitchen in? Will they get returns from that? We're also seeing more in the flexible rental market, in the built to rent and the multifamily going into short-term rentals. And then, you know, increasingly, I think we'll see a change in the use case of urban buildings, so offices and warehouses and retails that perhaps have suffered, especially over the last couple of years in the center of cities, you know, assuming regulations are working along this, turning into potentially into short-term rentals. And then we've already seen hotels, you know, like Marriott, you know, it has done this very successfully, moving into vacation rentals. And then more institutional investors looking at this market and increasing the investment in it. And then also new stock being built specifically for short-term rentals. And then with this opportunity for more supply to come in, we are looking at different operating models as well. So the rent to rent, where potentially, and it's happening in the US already in a few markets, is that tenants are being able to sublet their units if they're not there and make money themselves, as well as making money for the building owners and the managers. And then also, you know, looking at different ways of the master lease model and flex rentals within multifamily buildings. So by that, I mean that, you know, some buildings will have long-term rentals, some will have short-term, some will have mid-term, you know, all in the same, you know, floor potentially, or building. And then hybrid hotels, so hotels that are doing more of the apart hotels, and pop-up hotels. So we saw in Edinburgh a couple of years ago that one of the student union buildings over the summer was turned into Airbnbs and short-term rentals for a brief period of time, like a pop-up hotel. And then there's the growth in home sharing. And I know that Airbnb are looking, you know, that some of the listings that they need would be increasing this. And that mixed use of urban commercial buildings and redeploying commercial inventory into short-term rentals. And so what's next? Now, I would say that we are looking at a new asset class, and this, potentially is lodging that combines everything. It's just where you put your head. So in the future, we won't necessarily be having a conference for hotels or a conference for vacation rentals and a conference for multifamily. There will be a whole kind of lodging class that we have, which is essentially where people lay their heads at night and rest when they're not at their own homes. So I'll just come to the end of the presentation there and hand it back to you, Chris.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessica. Well, there's a lot to unpack there for sure. I've made some notes for the Q&A, but there's some real areas that's highlighted some great questions, especially in the brand strength and the supply quality and areas like that. So we will come back to you with some questions on the when we get to the Q&A. But thank you. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm really surprised about the Casa, like 30,000 homes, is one of the biggest operators. That's quite news for me. But yeah, very interesting presentation. So thank you, Jessica.